Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We're just going to give everyone another minute or two to file in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. But thanks so much for joining. We'll start in a few here. To everyone that's joining, welcome. We'll give everyone another 60 seconds or so to file in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. See more folks filing in. This is great. Thanks for joining. Get started in a couple seconds here. Just keeping an eye on the attendee list for a moment. Okay, I say let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today. Today, we are going to be talking about how we can really increase the ROI of our behavior-driven development, or BDD, practices with our Ranorex suite of tools. And especially, we're going to focus on our newer offering today, Ranorex DesignWise. So my name is Conor Wolford. I'm one of our senior account executives here. And I also specialize a lot with our newer product DesignWise. So it's going to be really great to be connected to all of you. Really appreciate you all joining. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Ivan, who is a solution engineer here as well. So we'll be splitting time today in the webinar, but that's us here. So thanks for joining. I still see people filing in. This is great. Before we get started, really, just a couple of housekeeping items. So all of you attendees will be on mute throughout the call, but feel free to ask your questions at any point in the GoToWebinar console, and we will really try to address them as we go, and especially during our 2 or 3 dedicated Q&A sections throughout the presentation today. So just so everyone is aware, and feel free to spread the word about this webinar is being recorded, and the link will be shared via email afterwards, as well as posted on our website within a week or so. Everyone will get the recording, whether you, everyone that registered will get the recording, whether you actually attended or not. So if you know of some folks who were unable to attend today, but still registered, they will of course get the recording link, and feel free to spread that to anyone else as well. So just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page there. And for the agenda today, what we're first really going to talk about are the benefits of behavior-driven development, or BDD in general, and why Ranorex and its suite of tools has an advantage in this realm. Second, we'll show an end-to-end demo of the Ranorex suite of products, focusing a lot on DesignWise today, as it is our newer product, but also showing how it fits into Ranorex Studio's execution efforts. But we're going to start with building a model in DesignWise, and showing that all the way through to execution and reporting in Ranorex, and highlighting a lot of key feature and benefits along the way. Lastly, we'll cover the key takeaways and encourage all of you with some next steps that we have to offer. And we'll also touch upon a discount that you all will receive upon scheduling a personalized introductory session about specifically DesignWise in the coming weeks. So more on that towards the end of the call, but just wanted to highlight the agenda for today. So since today's demo really does include 2 major stages, we will have a Q&A portion after each of those 2 major stages, rather than a big one at the end. Again, feel free to put your questions, comments, what have you, in the GoToWebinar console, and we'll try to address as many of those, if not all of them, as we can. And hopefully some of them will also be inherently answered along the way, but feel free to ask away. All right, I still see more people filing in. This is great. We're just getting started here, so welcome everyone. Now that we've taken care of the overall agenda, let's just dive right into today's content. So to start off, we've really seen that behavior-driven development has been growing in popularity immensely. Um, Sometimes some people are adopting it in different ways and at a faster rate than others, but in general, we are seeing it growing in popularity. And there are many benefits to adopting this BDD approach. But we would really like to focus on the three that you're seeing here. So first off, just to summarize what BDD is all about, it really ensures that there's a shared understanding of any system's expected behavior and avoids wasted efforts due to poor communication. This might be a review for some of you all, but I think it's just important to emphasize this before we dive into the tools and show how all of this ties in together. So that's one benefit of BDD. We also see that it really allows folks to respond to feedback quickly, which is huge. The modular nature of scenarios, and you'll see this inside the tools today, really make the creation of tests easier and changes to automation code even faster and safer, which is really nice. We're also finding through talking to clients and users like yourself that BDD is improving code redundancy, which results in increased productivity and shorter development cycles. It's the bottom line. Higher code quality minimizes project risk and costs, and everyone really benefits from that at the end of the day. However, what we find is that really, we like to say all BDD is not made equal. You know, from our perspective, the most optimal way is taking a model-based, data-driven BDD approach with at least some semi-audited ways of code conversion. And you'll see this today in today's demo of the tools. And this whole viewpoint and standpoint that we have really, we believe that it accelerates, and we have seen that it accelerates the benefits not only during the creation phase, but often more importantly in the maintenance one as well. So hopefully today, from honing in on DesignWise specifically, but also showing how that ties into Studio as well as other automation approaches that you all might be using, hopefully you start to see all of this come to life. But this might be a review for some of you all, but we want to make sure we hit this home and set the stage before we continue on here. So that's really, from our perspective, what BDD is all about. And in terms of kind of using BDD with Ranorex's tools, why should we really choose Ranorex as the solution there? We're finding from working with clients that there really are a couple of key advantages to utilizing Ranorex to kind of accelerate BDD. From the creation standpoint, as you're seeing on my screen here, generating tests in DesignWise with our newer test design optimization solution requires that test designers really think critically about their testing objectives. That's huge from our perspective. And not only that, but testers clearly document the results of that critical thinking. This process, as we're finding from our clients, and as our clients are finding, and hopefully you will find as well, improves how business and technical teams are communicating about what will be included and or omitted from a specific testing scope. Bridging those gaps in communication is huge for our clients, and it's kind of an inherent benefit of using these approaches. So I wanted to mention that. And also with using this model-based approach inside DesignWise, really, it is, as you'll find today, really easy to quickly make updates to your tests and scripts. It's no longer kind of going line by line, one by one. With this model-based approach, we can do that a lot faster, as you'll see today. And any updates made to your model, by the way, of your critical testing parameters inside DesignWise will be immediately reflected in your optimized scenarios and scripts. Again, instead of going line by line, we can now just kind of quickly make updates to our model inside the tools you'll see today. Click a button and everything else gets automatically updated from there. So we see maintenance times going down, efficiency going up, which is huge. Inside DesignWise, I guess one last thing that I'll mention is that, as you'll see today, even non-coders, this is big, even non-coders have the ability to contribute to automation efforts inside DesignWise and inside Ranorex Studio. This parameterized gherkin given when then script setup that's in a BDD-friendly structure, as you'll see today inside the tools, can be quickly exported into various automation-related formats for Studio and or any other test automation solutions or approaches that you all are using. We'll talk about how DesignWise really is, I guess you could say, agnostic to the automation or execution approaches that you're using. It does not have to be used alongside Ranorex Studio. These are meant to be two standalone tools that also work together, or you can choose one or the other. We'll talk more about that and you'll see that today, but I just want to make sure that we start to get all on the same page about that. So that's kind of the test design portion of all of this. And then from the execution standpoint, as we've been mentioning, as I'm sure some of you all are aware, Ranorex Studio users really only then need to add glue code with step definitions to automate those optimized outputs that are coming from Ranorex design-wise in that test design portion of this. And of course, the benefits of machine-trained object recognition, centralized repositories, and customized reporting still apply inside Ranorex Studio too. As I just mentioned though, just to really hit it home for the avoidance of doubt, DesignWise can be used with or without Studio. DesignWise, again, is relatively agnostic to whatever test automation solution you're using. So we offer a bunch of options inside DesignWise, whether you're using Studio for execution or some other framework, such as Cucumber or Selenium, Python, others. Lots of different options there to make sure that we fit either one of those tools, if not both, into your tool chain as seamlessly as possible. So we'll talk more about that today, as well as the fact, just as a side note, DesignWise can even actually generate optimized scripts and tests for manual execution if you still have any of that going on as well. So before we dive into the tools, I wanted to touch on a quick summary of this process that you're about to see today. We're going to focus most of the time on Ranorex DesignWise, as I mentioned, as this is the newer product, but we'll also see how that product fits into Ranorex Studio for execution as well. We have a blog post that we can post a link to for you all as well that really dives deeper into detailed instructions for stages 2 and 3 of this process. So we can share that as well. Found on the Ranorex site. But really the first step in this flow is to create a model of your application and build a feature file with scenarios inside Ranorex DesignWise, which is our test design optimization tool. Then there are a couple of setup steps that we will need to perform to make Ranorex Studio ready for BDD with those outputs that are coming from DesignWise if we choose to use Studio. And lastly, we'll connect the tool to the two tools and execute. It's important to note, again, we'll focus on DesignWise. We'll touch on how it fits into Studio, but again, we offer a lot of options inside DesignWise, export and integration-wise to really try to adapt the tool however way possible to your unique tool chains to make that test design portion fit into any kind of test management or automation solutions that you're using. One of them might be Studio, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. So with that, I say let's start to dive into the tool here. Again, at any point, feel free to put questions into the GoToWebinar console. We'll try to address as many of those as we can. We'll have 2 dedicated Q&A portions of this presentation today, one after the DesignWise portion, one after the Studio portion as we start to wrap up. So we'll try to address as many of those as we can. If you want to start adding those, we'll keep an eye on that. Okay. So next I wanted to start to transition into the first step of this process, which is where we'll spend the majority of our time today inside Ranorex DesignWise. Now, before I jump into the tool, I've put together an example test model that we'll go over today based on an example system under test, what you're seeing on my screen here. It's just this relatively simple, at least on the front end, this Treasury Direct Growth Calculator where basically we put in some initial investment amounts as you're seeing on my screen here. I'll zoom in a little bit more if I can, kind of your different tax rates and whatnot, and we'll start to generate that growth there. So that's the scope of what we're building this test model today based off of, as we'll see inside the tool. And this is our example system under test. We want to create optimized scenarios and run those scenarios functionally speaking to make sure we test all of the critical paths and interactions within this example application. So that's what we're testing today in this example. Wanted to just flash that up so you can see that for yourself. And with that, let's jump inside DesignWise here. Now again, I have already built out a test model that you're seeing here for the sake of time. When you first open up this screen here or get inside your account, a lot of times you'll be creating a brand new test model. The screen will be relatively blank for you to work off of. So just want to make that clear. I've already built this out, but let's review what's going on here. So again, this is Ranorex DesignWise. Ranorex DesignWise is a standalone test design optimization tool. It is really top of the line and the best at what it does, which is its specialty in test design optimization. This tool is not meant to replace any test management solutions that you might have in place, and it's not meant to replace any test automation solutions that you have in place. It is meant to complement those and work in tandem with them. Every single one of our clients these days is using typically some form of those two types of tools. And what they are doing is using this tool to just kind of essentially ensure that when they get to reporting and test management tools or get to execution and automation tools, they have 100% confidence in what they are running and the scenarios that have been created for them. We are no longer going to write scenarios on our own and test cases on our own and scripts that we believe are best covering our requirements, getting to the coverage that we need, because as we've seen over the years, those lead to a lot of inefficiencies, whether it's significant gaps in coverage that's allowing defects to slip through later down the line where they get a lot more time intensive and costly to address. We're going to catch those up front with this tool. And when you're writing tests by hand, we see a lot of wasteful repetition. Maybe you're writing too many tests, too few tests. Those are some of the typical issues that we see when people first approach us and are interested in learning more about DesignWise. And this tool is going to address every single one of those head on and resolve them for you. You'll see that today. So that's just a little bit of background on this test design solution. Again, it is a cloud-based tool. We have multiple hosting options that we can discuss on a follow-up call with you all to see what would work best for you. And it is standalone. You do not need to have Ranorex Studio to purchase this tool. You can purchase one or the other to just make it work. So I want to make that clear. So now that we have that background, let's see what's going on here. So this first screen that you'll always start with is really the first and most critical step in using DesignWise. It's defining your parameters. It's defining your parameters model or the model of critical testing ideas or variation ideas that you need the tool to generate tests and optimize tests based off of. So on this screen here, it's the most critical step because it is on us, the test designers, to ensure that we include what we need to include here and also in an efficient manner. And we'll talk more about that here. So obviously this is the first and most important step. And you're gonna get these critical testing ideas from a number of sources. If we take a look at what's going on here and how I've defined these, we have our, let me zoom in a little bit more. We have our parameters on the left. These are those critical testing factors. And in the middle here, we have the different ways in which those factors are varying in critical ways. So we have our parameters on the left and our parameter values in the middle here. So you're seeing the different ways in which these ideas are varying. The initial investment amounts, I've put some ranges here in a meaningful way. We have our interest rates, our frequencies, our years invested, our tax rates and whatnot. I've gathered these ideas hypothetically from looking at that UI. Let's say I have a ton of subject matter expertise in this domain. I might pull from that to define these parameters. I'm looking at user stories that have been handed to me, requirements, functional specs. I'm talking to business analysts, developers, whatever those sources have been. Maybe there's been some prior testing efforts before that and some known issues have come out of that can kind of feed our ideas here. Bottom line is whatever those sources of information are, that's where you are going to decide upon and extract what is critical to test. That's on the screen here. We're looking for ideas that are driving the ultimate scope of what we're testing here. In this example, it's that growth calculator. These are the factors that matter in generating that calculation for you. And we're leaving out certain ideas. We don't need to include, let's say on that growth calculator, there was a first and last name field. Sure, it's important when you're actually executing this to have those steps in there, add a first name, add a last name. However, when we actually think about the crux of what we're testing here, which is that ultimate calculation that's being generated, it doesn't matter what your first and last name is. So I actually have left those out of this critical testing parameters model, and I can account for those kind of more minute steps later on as I start to build out the scripts based on everything that we're doing here. So we'll talk more about that, but that's the bottom line here of this first and most important step, defining what's critical to test and defining those in efficient ways. I think those efficient ways, you can kind of start to see how I've generated ranges here. We call those equivalence classes, and maybe some more abstracted approaches here to how we define the tax rates and whatnot. those are topics that we would absolutely can go more into more detail when we schedule follow-up sessions, individual follow-up sessions with you all to dive deeper into the tool, provide an even more comprehensive demo. But just know we have to think through these things, and that step is important. We don't believe that that's going away. At some point, someone is going to have to critically analyze our requirements to make sure that we're developing thoughtful tests. And the good news is once you take this step, although you might have to think through that and spend some time there, the tool is going to take care of a lot of the rest for you. It's going to generate optimized scenarios based on all of this within seconds. So you no longer have to write those yourself. We'll see all of that, but just know that's what this step is all about. And before I move on, one more thing that I'll just mention, we have a number of different views for this step here. You can add your parameters kind of right here, just parameter name, add your parameter values. We can edit any of these. We have a bulk edit feature too, to add these just kind of in a more text-based way. I tend to use this, it's a little bit faster. And we also have some import capabilities. You can import either Excel files that are formatted in a very specific way that's kind of design-wise friendly, and we have a bunch of templates inside the tool for you to work off of if you're looking to work in Excel first and then import to automatically populate what you're seeing here. That's certainly an option. And we also actually have the ability to import what I'm about to show you here, which are mind maps. There are mind mapping tools out there to kind of get to a point where you have something that looks like this, and then the tool will actually accept the fact that you can feed these mind mapping files right into the tool to, again, auto-populate what you're seeing here. Just want to touch on mind maps real quick. This is a view that's automatically generated inside the tool as you build out your models. And it might seem simple, but it's a really powerful feature and tool here. Some people's eyes light up when they see this, because really what you're doing, as you're seeing here, is you're viewing all of those parameters and values, this model based on this scope that you've defined. You're viewing all of this in a really easy way in terms of communicating this to others and viewing it yourself. So just think, you can take this mind map to a business analyst, any stakeholder, really a client, and say, here's what we have decided is critical to test and how we want to test those ideas. Mr. or Mrs. Stakeholder, what are you thinking? Are there other ideas here based on your subject matter expertise that we should add to this that matter? Should we change it in how we've defined any of these ideas? You get that feedback really easily because everyone just can kind of quickly view this and know what's going on. And then again, as we touched on at the beginning of the call, the beauty of this model-based approach is as you get that feedback, all you have to do is head back to your model, change what you need to change, add what you need to add, and those changes are going to be automatically reflected in your scripts, your optimized scenarios that will generate in a second. All you have to do is make the updates here. No longer have to go line by line and change what you need to change as you get feedback, which is really, really nice. Last thing I'll just mention here, this is a key kind of tool for bridging that gap in communication, as some of you might be thinking, that we mentioned before, related to like bridging that gap in communication between business and technical teams. It was a benefit that kind of inherently came out of the tool that honestly, years ago when we were first looking at this approach, didn't realize would happen. But this thoughtful step in communicating that thoughtful step to others has really proven to provide immense value there. So wanted to call that out, but that's really this first and most important step, defining your parameters. I hope all that's generally making sense so far. Again, feel free to put questions in the GoToWebinar console here. We're happy to take any of those at those Q&A session portions that we'll have. So that's defining our parameters. At any point or once you're ready, you click this scenarios button and you immediately get a set of optimized scenarios or tests for you to look at. Let's talk about what's going on here, what we mean by optimized. What is this algorithm actually doing, right? So when I hover over this eye, just for context, what this blurb is essentially saying is that within that model that we defined, that was actually relatively simple, not too complex, there are already over 3,200 possible scenarios that we could technically potentially look at, especially if we were trying to quote unquote test everything. That's how many scenarios it would take to actually test everything. Typically, as your models get built out, you'll see that exponentially increase into the millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions of possible scenarios. And of course, we're not going to try to test everything, right? That's one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, what we're still not going to do is we're not going to, again, kind of do our best to write our scenarios on our own inside Excel directly in a framework or a tool that we believe are best meeting our requirements. We talked about the inefficiencies that it just inherently come with those approaches. It's no one's fault. It's just natural for those to creep in. And instead, we're going to meet in the middle on that spectrum and focus on covering the critical interactions within that model that we defined of ideas that are typically the interactions, statistically speaking, to trigger defects. So what's going on here to really kind of expand upon that? When I clicked that button, I initially got 30 tests to run. These 30 tests are covering 236 unique interactions. Our, as we call it, baseline strength of coverage is at two-way interactions. Now, some of you may be familiar with these approaches, but just to hit it home for everyone, what we mean by two-way interactions is that these 30 tests are going to cover 100% of every single unique pair of ideas, groups of two ideas that exist within that model that we defined. So an example of a pair would be a minimum interest rate with a weekly frequency, or 15,000 initial investment amount with a medium interest rate, or medium interest rate with a medium number of years invested. All of those are pairs of ideas, groups of two ideas, or what we call two-way interactions. Another way that this is put is actually pairwise analysis. We're covering all pairwise interactions. Some of you may be familiar with these approaches. They've been around for a while. The bottom line is it has been statistically proven within the industry, as well as just in applied statistics in general, applying it to software testing, that the majority of defects can actually be triggered by looking at every single idea within a model or within a scope, but also furthermore, looking at every group of two ideas being tested up against one another. The majority of defects can really be caught that way. It's an excellent way to get the coverage that you need. And defects that are caused by a group of three ideas being tested, what we call three-way interaction, or a group of four ideas, a four-way interaction, those just become significantly more rare than something like a two-way defect. So tying this all together, this algorithm is essentially saying if that's how the majority of defects are caused, two-way interactions, let's use that as our default setting here when we click that interaction or that scenarios button and cover 100% of those interactions. By doing so, each of these lines, each of these tests are as mathematically varied as possible, exercising our requirements or our coverage, as we like to say, as much as possible. And by the time you get to your 30th test, you've covered everything that you need to cover 100% of those two-way interactions, and you can move on. So we're keeping these highly varied. You're filling in gaps in coverage that you might have seen before with previous approaches to designing tests. We're eliminating wasteful repetition, and we are maximizing coverage, covering 100% of these interactions in as mathematically few tests as possible. It's essentially impossible for any human to beat the algorithm. You're going to be achieving more coverage, generating objectively better tests, and you're also going to be doing so in literally as few tests as you possibly can. And that's what this is all about, and that's why these tests are just objectively better than anything we could really kind of create it on our own when we're looking at maximizing coverage and doing so in an efficient way. Okay, so that's kind of this default coverage strength, but we have options. If you want to turn the coverage dial up and increase the thoroughness of your tests, we have those options. You're looking at a set of three-way tests now that are going to increase our test case count pretty dramatically to 131 now, but look how many more interactions we're covering now, over 1,200 of them being packed into just 131 tests. These 131 tests are covering 100% of every single possible group of three ideas. So think of a minimum interest rate with a weekly frequency and a minimum number of years invested. That's one three-way interaction. Every single possible one of those is going to be covered here. It's an exponentially more thorough way to test your systems. There are various reasons why you might adjust this setting here that we can talk about on later calls with you all, but just know we have a bunch of options here. You can actually go all the way up to six-way interactions. No one does this, none of our clients do. We hear only maybe like NASA will do it sometimes for mission critical space projects or systems that they're working on. But the option is there kind of more for fun. But What's really interesting is this mixed strength interactions options here. Here's where we can get a kind of account for our risk-based efforts and get super targeted with where we want to be more thorough in our model and in our scenarios, and where we might want to be less thorough. You can adjust the individual coverage strength for individual factors here, individual parameters, and say, I want to be more thorough in these 3 columns. I've already adjusted these to 3-way. Maybe I actually want to bump it to 1-way and not achieve pairwise interaction with anything with this column and just kind of have every value show up once. That's good enough for me. And I want to stick to 2-way for others. You click reapply. I've actually already done it. And you see how instead of going all the way from 20 to 131 tests, 2-way to 3-way overall, we only increased our test case count to 60 while still being more thorough in certain areas and not being as thorough, but still getting really good coverage in other areas. So this is a heavily used feature for what it's worth. All of our clients are using it. It's a great way to get the coverage that you need without generating too many tests as well. So I wanted to point that out. So I'm going to spend a couple more minutes in the tool here, and then I'll turn things over to Ivan to look at how all of this then translates into Ranorex Studio for actual execution. But before I do that, just to call out a couple more features here, we have some analysis capabilities that are huge differentiators for this tool. This is one example of those. It's called the coverage matrix. Essentially what we're doing here, where this slider is right now, is we are viewing the exact coverage that's being achieved after executing the first 16 of, what was it, 23 or 30 2-way tests, whatever that total number was. You can see after the first 16 tests, after we run those, we're already at 75% coverage. I execute maybe a couple more and we get to 80, move the slider along here, you can kind of view it at any point here in your testing efforts. And if we look at this matrix, not only are we reviewing how much coverage we're achieving after running X number of those tests, but we're actually seeing exactly what we are covering and what we have not covered yet after those first 17. So green squares on this matrix here with the 2 axes, each square represents one of those 2-way interactions, those pairs of ideas. Green squares have been covered after the first 17 tests, where our slider is right now. Red squares are interactions that have not been covered yet, but you can see exactly when they will first be covered. This one will be covered in test case 19. We'll see it turn green at that point. And so as we execute more tests, you start to see more green, less red until you get to 100% coverage. The implications of leveraging these types of coverage reports and tools is that we can get super targeted and precise with making smarter decisions about our execution efforts. Viewing coverage quickly, as well as making decisions on that information that you have when you're just kind of writing tests in Excel or right inside a tool, visualizing all of that and communicating that and deciding upon it is extremely difficult. This tool automatically provides you with those insights for you to just make a quick decision and move on, and do so with 100% confidence. Take this to any manager and say, here's what I think is enough testing here. What do you think? Do we need to rework any of this to change the order up a bit? Or can we just stop testing here? Do we need to execute a few more? Make that decision and move on. That's a huge differentiator for this and something that provides immense value to our clients. So I wanted to call that out. That's one example. We have a couple other analysis features, two other features that just touch on. We have the abilities to essentially ensure that when we click the scenarios button, all of our scenarios are valid based on business rules. So, another way to say that is that they're possible to test for. We can use this constraints tab to actually outline any and define any impossible to test for interactions that should never show up in those generated scenarios together. I'm going to just take a really random example here, and let's just say minimum years invested can't go with this initial investment amount. For whatever reason, based on my business expertise, that's an invalid interaction that should never show up together in a test. And when I outline it and define that with what we call an invalid pair, that will now never show up in those 30 or so tests that I generated. We can do that for any number of these interactions. You can actually do the inverse of an invalid pair and tie values together using the green arrows with different types of when, then, or always statements that you can add. When this value appears, it should always be paired with this other value. Those types of statements you can add. And we actually have some more advanced capabilities here, like the ability to add all of those statements in a text-based way really quickly, just kind of outlining the relationship here, just making one up. Maybe I want to use a when then statement. We can do all of that. But we also have a newer constraint that we also call, I'll just do it here, the skip constraint. It's a way to basically account for all the conditional branching logic in your system, where it's like, if this initial investment amount is selected, let's just say the following 3 parameters are irrelevant. They should be blank in our scenarios, because we should just kind of skip over those and then continue on with the rest. You can outline any of that logic here. I know I'm moving fast, and apologies for that, but this is something that we would really drive home in a more detailed follow-up kind of personalized demo session for you. So just keep that in mind. And you can also always try this out in the trials for DesignWise that we'll talk about at the end of the call too. So that's what we have to offer in terms of constraints handling, making sure that all of our scenarios essentially make sense based on business rules. We have other features to kind of override the algorithm a bit and forcefully interject and insert certain scenarios that we absolutely need to see, specific ones that we need to see on top of all the other interactions that we're covering in this tab. And finally, before I hand things over to Ivan, I'm going to touch on our scripting capabilities. So I need to generate tests again, just because I made some changes.
Conor,
So go ahead, Ivan.
Maybe
yeah.
Before the scripting, let's say we have a customer who just wants to get quickly the optimized set of data from this screen. Maybe scripting is handled in their automation framework. Is that possible?
Sure. Yeah. Good question, Ivan. I appreciate you asking that. So we have a number of export options that we'll talk about on this screen here in a moment, but we do have some kind of quick export options under the Save As feature, as Ivan was alluding to, where if we simply just, for whatever reason, some of our clients want this, if we simply just want the table of data and scenarios that we're seeing here, this optimized scenario output, if we just simply want this grid, we can just kind of quickly export that in a CSV or a data table, XML file, JSON, you name it. You click that, one of these options here, it downloads, and you'll just kind of get this data here. So that's kind of a quick option if that's something that all you need for whatever reason. Some people want that. We have those options there, but we also have some more detailed export options that I'll mention in a moment that kind of tie into these scripting capabilities that we have. So to just start to introduce you all to these capabilities here, this is what we call DesignWise Automate. Automate essentially, let me zoom out so you can see a little bit more of this. This is a way, when you first open it up, by the way, in a Newton test model, it's going to be relatively blank. You're going to get a template to work off of, but you, the test designer, or someone is meant to write this out. So what's going on here essentially is that we're aligning with our BDD efforts, right? Behavior-driven development, and we're in a Gherkin given when then format, clearly describing the steps of what we're testing here within this test model. Along the way though, using this setup, I'm clearly describing what I'm testing. Anyone should be able to look at these steps, right, and observe and understand what our goals are here for this given effort. But along the way, what's really cool about this feature here is that we're inserting parameter placeholders into these steps. When I open this up, this dropdown, this dropdown includes all of the parameters from the model that I defined on the previous screens here. They're all grayed out because I've used all of them, but you can reuse any of them. And when we do that, I've created 2 scenario blocks here that are kind of addressing different paths. When I do that, on the right-hand side, we have a preview in real time of what our feature file output would look like, one of our export options. And you're seeing here that inherently these scripts and these steps become data-driven. When we add these parameter placeholders, DesignWise is just going to start cycling through the optimized data in those spots from those optimized scenarios that we generated. So this data is in the same exact order as that scenarios table that we generated. It's just now in this script format. We can design these steps and these scripts however way we'd like. You can include every parameter in a scenario block. You might break it down into multiple scenario blocks that are looking at different then results. We also have the ability to kind of create multiple feature files with these tabs. Here's one for positive, here's one for some negative scenarios that perhaps I wanted to create. I didn't really do it yet. And it's really nice to just get a preview here. And you could see this scenario block is related to test case 1 with test case 1 data here. We've got test case 2 with its data and so on. Bottom line is you write one or a couple or however many shell scripts you want on the left-hand side here. And then the tool automatically applies those to every single applicable test scenario that you generated. So you might even only need to write one script here, and you're instantly, when you export this especially, you're going to get hundreds or thousands of whatever lines of test steps. So you save yourself a ton of time there. You write one script, the tool takes care of the rest of generating these steps. And when maintenance needs to happen, you just go back and edit one or a couple scripts, and those updates get reflected into the rest of the scripts here for those specific tests. So there's a lot of power that comes behind using this feature. And of course, as you're seeing, aligns really well with behavior-driven development efforts as well, while still making things data-driven and cycling through those optimized data sets that we're getting out of the design-wise and the scenarios here. So that's all great. And one last thing I'll mention, we're going to use the scenario format specifically when we're transitioning into Ranorex Studio, because that's what Studio accepts. But we do also have the ability to create a scenario outline here. It's another option from the scenario, where instead of generating a gherkin block like we did down here for every applicable test, we're actually generating one data table with each of these rows being our applicable scenarios that we're pulling in the same exact order. You're seeing just the data there from the scenarios screen, and each of these columns are those parameters that I added to that given scenario outline script. So we have options. It just totally depends on what you need, depending on how you're operating outside of design-wise. For Studio, we're going to use scenario here. And I think with that, I'll just touch on the export options and then we'll turn to Ivan there. So we have a number of export options that are available. And so this is the part where, it's important to highlight again that design-wise can of course be used with Ranorex Studio, but you're seeing here, it can be used with a number of other tools. And we really tried to offer these options to really fit into any tool chain. You're seeing some specific tool names here for test management or automation that will provide different outputs, customized outputs for that specific solution's needs, essentially for you to kind of just feed directly into it. I won't touch on many of these today. We can, of course, do that in a follow-up call. I wanted to focus in on the automated test framework option here. So we have a number of different options here. What this selection does in general is it's going to take those scripts that you've built, all of that optimized output that you're getting from design-wise, and it's going to generate some skeletal code in that specific language or framework that you choose for your automation efforts. Skeletal code. So think, if we chose the let's choose the Java Cucumber option. We're going to get a zip file when I download this with a step definitions file, an action words file, a feature file for that specific selection that we've chosen. There are others that might give you a project test file or whatnot. The bottom line is we have a lot of selections here that will allow you to download this, get your skeletal code, whether you're using Studio or some other framework or solution. You just have to add a net glue code to that skeletal code to make it just run outside of design-wise, and that glue code is going to entirely depend on how you're operating, outside of the tool at that point. So we'll give you a starting point there, and this is how even those non-coders, those non-technical testers can still contribute to automation efforts by giving those files then to an automation specialist to run with from there, which is really nice. So bottom line is here, we're going to get extremely confident in what we're testing and how we're testing it. And we're going to hand this over to our automation solution of choice. And today we'll show you how that works with Ranorex Studio, since we're all under the Ranorex umbrella here. But just know we really try to make this design-wise tool to fit into any tool chain. So in a follow-up call, you come to us and say, here are the tools that I'm using or frameworks that I'm using. We will have a discussion with you about best practices and Brown fitting design-wise then into that tool chain. So just keep that in mind. So for Studio, what we're going to do is really start to download this in a specific format that Studio is going to develop or going to utilize. So we're going to use the scenario format that you saw under the scripts tab, and we're going to select the C# option and spec flow. So when I do this, it's going to download a file. And at this point, I'm going to, Ivan, hand things over to you to take this file and start to show how that's run in specifically Studio as one option for execution.
Thank you, Conor.
So transitioning over to you. Yep. Okay.
And well, we're
All right.
switching the
You should
share. If
present it
there are
now.
any
Yep.
questions on the first part of our presentation, feel free to share them in the questions
Yes.
section of GoToWebinar. And you should be able to see the blog post.
Yep, Ivan, we're seeing your screen.
Perfect. So as Conor was mentioning, once the feature file is in your hands, exported from DesignWise, or for that matter, any other system that utilizes feature files, there are a couple of steps to set up the studio and make it ready for BDD. At a high level, we need to enable two add-ins, SpecFlow and NUnit, by GitHub download, and change a couple of workspace settings. As you can see, the detailed instructions with screenshots are provided in our blog article, so you can easily follow them. Also, an important note, this flow works for Ranorex projects created in C#, not VB.NET. And once that setup is done, as we transition to the studio, starting with the 10.5 version, it supports the import of feature files with scenario blocks per test case via this add existing item dialog. Any application, as I mentioned, that leverages Gherkin syntax can seamlessly integrate with Studio following these formatting standards, so it's not exclusive to DesignWise. And we can view how that feature file looks like, which should feel very similar to the preview window that Conor showed. And one of the key aspects of the BDD flow on the Studio side is semi-automated Gherkin to code conversion. So right after the import, we can see that there is an executable file already created, but it is blank. Once we actually build the solution, we can see the code file populated in the project by the studio itself via SpecFlow add-in. And the reason we say semi-automated is the file is not yet ready for execution. We can see some of the references to core libraries, and as we scroll a little bit more down, we can see the outlines for Gherkin steps, but an automation specialist will still need to provide the actual methods to allow this file to interact with the application. But this does give them a good head start and allows a non-technical user to perform the first part of the flow up to this point. Now, how can we go about actually adding that glue code, those automated step definitions? You can do it directly in Studio by adding a new item and selecting SpecFlow step definition. Or similarly, if you already have that file, you can import it by the add existing item workflow that we showed just previously. As you can see, if we do the creation inside the studio, the file contains the template for both static and parameterized step definitions. This is where the automation engineer will actually specify the methods for interacting with the system under test. If I switch to the actual final version of that file with already everything filled out, you can see all the implementation. And the code for this demo is based on setting the values directly or invoking drop-down selection, so you won't see as much mouse movement. And the level of detail in the report is controlled by statements like this, where you either provide detailed descriptions or you can just specify the result of the operation. And one thing we wanted to mention is, although we are focusing on the BDD flow for today's webinar, it's not the only option within Ranorex Studio, as it allows you to create tests via recording or keywords as well. As you can see here, the similar flow for the similar application could be achieved by recording or directly adding keywords in this action table format. And if you are transitioning from traditional scripting like this in Ranorex to BDD, you can use the code of existing actions or recorded steps by viewing it and copying it from that actions table. And the second advantage to highlight is that your methods, if we go back to the finalized step definition file, can be set up in such a fashion that they leverage the repository of your Ranorex object, which is built through Studio's machine-trained object recognition. And if you do that, you then also benefit from the Studio's ability to propagate object updates, which simplifies maintenance. We've gone through the flow for the first time, but let's say we made some updates to the feature file. So what happens then? First, we would need to re-import the feature file, and we would get the option to either overwrite what we had previously or add another file. And depending on our choice, we should be able to quickly regenerate the executable file by rebuilding our solution. So we don't need to worry about the time spent on recreating our executables. When it comes to the, let me clean this one from the project and focus on the final version. When it comes to the step definitions changes, they also need to be made only if there are some adjustments to the actual steps, because if only the data, if only that scenario table in DesignWise changed, then all the steps would still be applicable, and once the feature file is replaced, your solution is already execution ready. So once this kind of pair of files with the feature and step definitions is complete, execution is performed via command line with a couple of possible customization arguments. Probably the most important one is the report formatting. By default, the runner creates it in NUnit3 XML, which is supported as is by some of the tools. But users can also choose to install an add-in which converts it to JUnit with this line adjustment at the end. Arguably, JUnit is just a little more popular. For the demo purposes, we will execute just the first 5 scenarios. So once the initial solution is processed, we can see the page opening and the runner interacting with the calculator, providing the optimized scenario data, and validating the successful display of the results. In this particular case, we do not actually close the whole browser, but we just focus on closing the tab and reopening it. And we will stop after these 5 iterations. Once it is done, this directory of your solution will have the reports in a couple of formats. As I mentioned, you get the NUnit3 or JUnit, depending on your settings, which would look like this. And also by default, you get the report in the standard Ranorex format, which would look something like this and gives you plenty of information about the actions that were taken, the time it took to complete all of them, and also your successes, warnings, or failures. With those reports in hand, or at least for the more common use case, let's say with the XML report in hand, the rest of the steps are the same as in traditional Ranorex execution when it comes to integration with CI/CD or test management tools. For example, we can be sending that XML report to X-ray as outlined in the support article. And you can see the examples of the scripts that would accomplish that on this page. This concludes that end-to-end flow where you start with your model building and proceed through the scenario generation by the algorithm, which gives us the optimization, and then export of the feature file, which again is data-driven, allows you to create just multiple templates which export into many test cases. We, with the 10.5 or later version, can then import them into our Studio solution, automatically generate the executable by just building it, and quickly add the step definitions based on the templates provided, and finish with our fast and very resilient execution. With that said, let's see if there are any questions now on either this portion or the DesignWise one.
Looks like we've inherently answered some of these, Ivan. So if there are any others, folks, feel free to put them in as we start to wrap up here. But Ivan, how about I steal the screen on back?
That sounds good.
Cool. All right, everyone. So just to summarize here, we really do hope that this demo showed you that adopting, this model-based, data-driven BDD approach really does allow you to accelerate your test automation efforts. It also will objectively just help you achieve large time savings during the test planning and maintenance phases, especially, while still achieving more thorough coverage, which is huge. Everyone wants that. All of this ultimately at a higher level will lead to significant effort savings, cost savings, however way you want to put it. And by implementing such BDD with the Ranorex suite of tools, you will get the best of both worlds when it comes to design and execution, as you've seen today. With DesignWise, we'll quickly generate and maintain very thorough test sets, auto-generate those visual artifacts that we talked about that serve as the common ground for visualizing all of this with stakeholders and collaboration. And you'll also be able to kind of cut down your scripting time with the data-driven templates, as we saw today. With Ranorex Studio, if you elect to use it for automation, you will lower that technical barrier to entry that we saw today with that semi-automated code conversion. And even more so with Studio, you can use a flexible IDE, as Ivan showed, facilitating that ease and efficiency and reporting all that customization. And at the same time, just to wrap it up, you still will benefit from powerful object recognition and a wide variety of supported devices and really technologies at a high level. Of course, though, just to emphasize it again, these benefits can be achieved in other automation solutions as well, alongside DesignWise. So just for a limited time offer here, which is exciting, if you do decide to schedule a DesignWise live demo with a solutions engineer or an account manager here at Ranorex by March 31st of this year, you will receive a 5% off discount on your first year of any DesignWise licenses that you purchase, which is really awesome. So the link for the trial accounts, they're 30 days for DesignWise and 14 days for Studio. We wanted to really emphasize DesignWise today, so I put that free 30-day trial to DesignWise that you can request at any point inside the chat window as well. You'll find that option on the Ranorex site as well. And in order to reach out to that solutions engineer or manager to get that live demo set up for DesignWise, just email us at evaluation@ranorex.com and we'll take it from there if you want to receive that awesome discount. So hope you all really enjoyed the presentation today to talk about these two awesome products that we have to offer in the market, test design optimization as well as test automation with Studio. Hope you found it really kind of helpful, and I know we have 2 minutes left, and I see just reviewing questions one last time to make sure we hit all of them. I think, what we have here, I see some questions related to specific tools that you might be using. We'll answer those in a follow-up call with you all, I say, to really kind of dive into your specific situation and tool chain. I think that's the best place to do that. So reach out to evaluation@ranorex.com and we'll take care of it. And I see one question here related to just design-wise. Design-wise, for the avoidance of doubt, is a cloud-based app. All kind of hosted in the cloud. We have multiple hosting options to best kind of suit your security preferences that we can talk more about as well. So just reach out to us and we'll start to get really specific with your situations and needs and outline kind of the best way to approach all of this with you. And we're really looking forward to that. So hopefully we start to hear from you all ASAP with those trial requests coming in. I highly encourage you to take us up on the DesignWise one as soon as possible. And also, let's get those live demos set up. Let's dive into your specific needs. Myself or someone else will be on that call to walk you through everything, and just email us at evaluation@ranorex.com. So with that, I say we are at the top of the hour here. We look forward to hearing from you all soon. And if you have any questions in the meantime, just send us an email at evaluation@ranorex.com and we'll take it from there.
And just a question about
Go ahead,
the app. It was, I believe, if I understood the question correctly, also about the applicability of modeling, execution, etc., to desktop versus just the web app that we demonstrated today. And the short answer there is that both the modeling process and the execution process can be applied to desktop, web, mobile, whichever platform you would choose. And we do have a sample app we could show, but for the time's sake, that would be better handled in the follow-up call, as Conor mentioned.
Thanks for emphasizing that, Ivan. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have excellent rest of your days wherever you are located. And again, we look forward to hearing from you all very soon. Email us in the meantime if you have any questions or need anything. So we'll stop the presentation here and have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.